Abelardo de la Espriella took the oath of office last Friday in Cali, Colombia, and that alone is history. No Colombian president has ever been sworn in outside of Bogota before, the capital. So this guy, the new president, decides he's already saying that he wants to govern from the regions. He's not going to stay holed up in Bogota, but wants to govern from Barranquilla, from Cali, from obviously Medellín, which gave him a lot of support, and really to get outside of Casa de Nariño, which is like the White House, like the name of the presidential palace in Colombia, in Bogota. This inauguration almost happened somewhere else entirely. De la Espriella originally wanted the ceremony to take place at a military installation in Cauca. Cauca is a department. Colombia has departments instead of states or provinces. And Cauca is south of Cali. Cali is in, and this is confusing to people, Cali is in a department called Valle de Cauca, which is the Valley of Cauca. Cauca is a river that runs through Colombia, and it goes through Antioquia and eventually empties into the Magdalena River. It's like the second biggest river in Colombia. And so one department where Cali, the city of Cali is named the Valley of the Cauca, so the Valley of the Cauca River. But then there's another department which is just named Cauca itself, not Valley of Cauca. And there's a military installation. And down there, this is a troubled part of the country where the Colombian military and police are fighting against these armed guerrilla groups like the FARC dissidents, the people who used to be part of the FARC but didn't want to lay down their weapons. And they've been causing a lot of trouble in that region. They're very violent. They killed a busload of people a few months ago. We wrote about it in Finance Colombia. And in fact, for this inauguration, they caught a bus with 1,000 pounds of explosives. They were going to try to do like a Timothy McVeigh thing and like blow up the inauguration. But the police or the military was able to stop that and caught the bad guys. Congress approved the idea of Abelardo having his inauguration down here, but Gustavo Petro, who's been extremely bitter about his friend Ivan Cepeda's lost, and he's really just been trying to make trouble for the new president coming in. But his government blocked the military logistics request, so the military was forbidden from participating in any way to help hold the inauguration down in Cauca. So the venue shifted to Cali in Valle de Cauca, and also partly over volcanic ash disruption risk at Popayan. Popayan is in Cauca, the city. Popayan is the name of the city. And so the House approved to really overwhelmingly, even 117-7, with the Gustavo Petro's Pacto Histórico, now Ivan Cepeda, the losing candidate, and some of the Green Party members walking out of the vote in protest. Congress convened at the Universidad Santiago de Cali, the main university in Cali, their arena, to administer the oath, with Senate President Honorio Enriquez presiding. Afterward, De la Espriella moved separately to the Pichincha Battalion, a military garrison where he addressed the armed forces and police commanders for more than an hour. Let's see, we had Argentina's Javier Milei was there, from Spain. I don't remember if he's a fifth or sixth or whatever number he is. Ecuador's Daniel Noboa, Paraguay's Santiago Peña, and Jose Raul Molino from Panama were there. Chile's Jose Antonio Cas came for bilateral meetings on the sidelines. And Colombia's national police had their hands full getting to that point. Like I mentioned, national police officers intercepted this bus with 1,000 pounds of explosives just outside of Cali. And it had been rigged up as a bus bomb to target the military and police installations tied to the inauguration. Outgoing Defense Minister Pedro Sanchez attributed the plot to the Jaime Martinez Front, part of the FARC dissident Estado Mayor Central. So you'll see FARC, and then you'll see this group called the EMC, Estado Mayor Central, which is the group of the people that were part of the FARC, but when Juan Manuel Santos, the president, did the peace agreement with the then FARC, there were these groups that were like, we are going to stay out here and keep being guerrillas. We don't want peace and we don't want to come in and put down arms or anything. And so this is one of them. And they've got this bad guy who's in charge of it called Ivan Mordisco. And that's not really his name that his mom gave him. So they all take on these noms de guerra. They all take, so like Che Guevara, his name wasn't Che, his name was Ernesto. Okay, but they like to take these names, these nicknames, and they think it, I don't know, I guess they think it makes them look cool. So the outgoing defense minister said that this was all a plot of Ivan Mordisco. And Mordisco means like a bite, okay? So like take a bite of something or a nibble of something. Okay, so this is like Ivan who's going to bite you, all right? And they also implicated a bomb maker who's known by the alias Mad Max as the one who built this bus bomb. And this came less than a week after a truck bomb went off next to a police station in Cucuta, all the way on the other side of the country, near the Venezuelan border, which injured at least 11 people, according to local security officials. Now, you have to remember, Abelardo de la Espriella is coming in on a hardline platform, that he's going to take it to these guerrillas, he's going to take it to these bad guys, and he's going to eliminate them. So they are like, okay, so their idea, it seems like, is to come out kind of challenging him and to cause maximum mayhem if they can and see if they can get him to back off. So that's what it seems like is going on. But anyway, for this inauguration, the government put about 11,000 soldiers and police on the ground, in the air, and at sea for Inauguration Day. The Centro de Paz y Seguridad at the Universidad Externada, which is a university in Bogota, they put the numbers on the security backdrop in a report last December, 40,663 homicides in Colombia between August 2022 and August 2025. That's Gustavo Petro's first 3 years in office. An annual average of 13,554, up 7.6% from the 37,795 recorded over the same length of time under Ivan Duque, whose government averaged 12,598 killings per year. Petro's, well, not his government wasn't killing people, but that's how many took place under his government's watch, okay? So Gustavo Petro's central security policy, Paz Total, set out to negotiate simultaneously with practically every armed and criminal group in the country. But instead, well, they negotiated, they were kind of made a mockery of things, but these groups grew bigger and in some cases doubling or tripling in size. When Petro took office in August 2022, Colombia's illegal armed groups had an estimated 15,120 members under arms. And across all these guerrilla groups, and you can include mafias in there like Clan del Golfo. By the second half of 2025, that number had climbed to about 25,278, with more than 10,000 new members added while the government was at the negotiating table. So Petro comes in, we're going to have total peace, and we're going to give these guys a good talking to, and they're going to lay down their arms and be peaceful little bunny rabbits. But they've almost doubled in size during just his term. The growth concentrated hardest in Cauca, where we just talked about, Bajo Cauca. Now, Bajo Cauca, all this Cauca stuff has to be confusing, right? So you have Cali, which is in the department of Valle del Cauca. And then Cauca, which is the department south of there, where Popayán is where there's a big presence of like Estado Mayor Central, this ex-FARC group. And then you have Bajo Cauca, which is in Antioquia, where like Antioquia is where Medellín is. But Bajo Cauca, the river starts down by Popayán, down by Cauca, and it flows north. And Bajo Cauca is where you come down out of the mountain region and you come into the flat plains as you approach the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, and that's where Rio Cauca comes down out of the Hidroituango Dam and starts to come down out of the mountainous highlands into the low coastal plains And they're called Bajo Cauca because that's where the river's at its lowest because it's closest to sea level. So you have Cauca, you have Bajo Cauca, which is like a region, but it's not a government place. And you have Valle de Cauca, and you have the Rio Cauca. But anyway, stay with me here. Catatumbo, which is the worst affected area in the Department of Norte de Santander, which is on the Venezuelan border. And that's where the ELN really has the people in a stranglehold. And then down in Nariño is between Cauca and Ecuador. Okay, and Pasto is the capital city down in Nariño. But this is a Pacific Coast region, and these regions are all hard hit by violence, a lack of state presence, and extortion, kidnapping, narcotics production, and these types of things. Where the Colombian state has the weakest presence to begin with. Now, De la Espriella moved on that inheritance he got from Petro immediately. On his first day, he signed a decree creating urban security defense blocks in Colombia's largest cities, what his government is calling the country's largest urban security operation, targeting extortion, robbery, and homicide. And he has begun dismantling Petro's failed Total Peace Initiative. Now, remember, Petro, he had these things, this one called the scandal called the Tarimazo. And he took these mobsters who were locked up in prison, and Petro comes and he says, I'm going to make you a peace negotiator. So it's like, okay, if you have Al Capone back in the gangster days of Prohibition, it's like going to Al Capone and saying, I want to make you a spokesperson for Prohibition, which is the time in the U.S. when alcohol was illegal. And these gangsters and mafias like Al Capone is a famous one. Like that's where they made their fortune, or made their killing quite literally, because they became these violent rum runners and alcohol smugglers. Okay, so you probably might think it would be funny to go to Al Capone in jail and say, I want to make you a spokesperson for just say no to illegal hooch. Okay. Petro went into these prisons and got these gangsters and said, I'm going to make you the people causing, they're in jail for homicides and for extortion. And Petro says, I want you to be peace spokesman. And they go, okay. But they keep doing all their crimes and everything, but they just kind of like the little G-man badge that they get from the government. So that's all. Abelardo, the new president, has basically said enough of this. We're going to take a hardline approach. Now, if we look over at the Centro Democrático, Álvaro Uribe's party, it's coming apart at exactly the moment De la Espriella is taking power. This party's candidate this cycle, so you had your three main candidates. You had something like 6 or 8 candidates, but everybody thought the race was going to be between Iván Cepeda, Paloma Valencia, who was with the Centro Democrático Party, and this outsider, De la Espriella, okay? Senator Paloma Valencia, Uribe's acolyte, was polling near 20% heading into the May 31st first round. She finished a distant third with 7% behind De la Espriella's 43.7% and Iván Cepeda's 40.9%. Cepeda's coalition, the Pacto Histórico, counts the Colombian Communist Party as a senior member, the same party Cepeda's own father once led. Centro Democrático, a party built for 2 decades on being the wall against the Colombian left, finished behind a coalition anchored by the actual Communist Party. Uribe's own legal status complicates the popular version of this story. A Bogotá judge convicted him of bribery and procedural fraud in August 2025 and sentenced him to 12 years of house arrest, the first Colombian former president ever convicted at trial. A Bogotá appeals court overturned that conviction 2 months later, ruling that key wiretap evidence should have been excluded and that testimony from paramilitary witnesses was unreliable. Now that Supreme Court judgment is actually being investigated too, to see if any kind of shenanigans took place to get induce the Supreme Court to overturn this conviction. Prosecutors have appealed to the Supreme Court, and that court has not ruled as of this recording. Convicted, then unconvicted, with the final word still pending. Now, regardless of the legal outcome, the political cost has already landed. Senator Maria Fernanda Cabal one of the party's most prominent hardline voices, has just left Centro Democrático in January, along with her husband, Jose Felix Lafurin, who is the head of Fedegan, which is Colombia's Cattle Ranchers Association. And that couple has cited irregularities in the internal processes that selected Valencia over her. Now, she wanted Uribe's blessing to be, she wanted to run for president. She would have been walloped. But she has supporters within her own party, but like nobody really likes her outside of a few people in her party. But even she came in number 3. She wasn't even second place in that internal party selection process. This month, around the inauguration itself, Cabal went further and formally filed for a full split, an excision of the party. No party can survive when it renounces the ideas that gave it origin, she wrote. She wrote an article, op-ed piece in Semana magazine. Semana means week, so it's a weekly magazine. Centro Democrático was built around Uribe's personal ability to anoint a candidate and deliver the votes behind them. Because you have all these people who are like, Uribe, we're Uribistas, they call followers of his movement. Where I live, not too far from his house, a lot of people are Uribistas, or they were, and they would like put up these bumper stickers during previous elections, and they would say, I'm going to vote for whoever Uribe tells me to. Now, I'd be embarrassed to have a bumper sticker like that to say I'm going to vote for whoever somebody else tells me to. I guess the MAGA people think like that. They're like, we're going to do whatever Donald Trump says. But Uribe, with his influence being weakened by his legal fight, his age, and the unpopularity of the Iván Duque administration, so he picked Iván Duque to be the Centro Democrático candidate back, 8 years ago. And Duque was president. And very few people, even on the right, would say that he did a good job. Even Maria Fernanda Cabal called him a mamerto, which is really like a derogatory term for it would be like calling somebody back during the Cold War a pinko commie, or something. It's like really it's sort of, you would translate it as leftist idiot. And while he was president, you had people in his own party who were so dissatisfied with him that they were out there calling him a mamerto. And so the party built entirely around him, around Uribe, is losing relevance alongside with him. His base of followers is aging, but that circle is visibly shrinking. And younger conservatives Colombian conservatives who don't carry the same nostalgia or attachment to him as a man, and they weren't around to admire his successes against the guerrillas, which he was successful against the FARC. They went in a different direction in this election, even while staying kind of well to the right in their own political thinking or philosophy or ideology. So they went even more to the right than Uribe, who actually, he's kind of a hardliner, but he's not really a hardcore conservative. If you look and analyze his platform, when he was president, he raised taxes, he expanded the role of the state in many ways. So he's not like he's certainly not a libertarian, but he's not like a U.S. style conservative, if you will. But with his movement, now if you look, Bogota has about 8 million people. And that's about 3 times the size of Medellín, which has 2.5 million people. And Bogota went for Cepeda in the runoff, over 2 million votes to under 2 million. Medellín went the other way and went hard, 819,285 for De La Espriella against 421,839 for Cepeda. This was in the runoff. So now Paloma Valencia, she lost in the first round, as did the other candidates. So now you have the runoff between Espriella. So basically you have hard right versus Cepeda, which is communist level left. Okay. So the margin in Medellín was almost 400,000 votes. In the single city, that's a fraction of Bogota's size. And so De La Espriella's entire national margin of victory was about 250,830 votes. Medellín alone produced a net margin of roughly 397,000. Take Medellín out of the equation and Abelardo does not win. So Medellin is aware of this, and the city has spent 2 decades building the strongest reputation for growth and entrepreneurship in the country, and it will expect a return. The international airport expansion that Petro wouldn't sign off on, I hear he might have, like his last day in office, signed it, so he didn't give Abelardo the pleasure of signing it. But Petro wouldn't allow the airport in Medellin to expand. And if any of you have flown in, you know that the airport is way under capacity. The Paisas even airplan the group, the business that has the concession for like the airport operations, offered to do it with no government, with no national government money. The national government just had to sign off on the expansion, to allow the work to proceed. And Petro wouldn't do it. He really could, because Petro doesn't like the Paisas and the Paisas don't like Petro. I mean, some people do, but this region where Medellin is, you can see, went 2-1 for De La Espriella, who's not even he was born in Bogota, okay? But Medellin and the Paisas are now going to be expecting not like pro quo payback, but they want their airport expansion. They want highway infrastructure, security, continued support for the business climate that's made it a magnet for nearshoring and technology. You look at Medellin and with their ACI Medellin and their Ruta N business incubator that have been really, garnered international attention for the things that they do to foster entrepreneurship and innovation in the city. Now, De La Espriella's choice of Cali for the inauguration and his stated plan to run cabinet meetings out of Barranquilla while keeping the formal presidency at the Palacio de San Carlos in Bogota is a direct. Oh, so that's another thing. So he's, you're going San Carlos. So Casa Nariño is there, and it's, he wants to like make it a ceremonial place or like a museum, and he wants to actually operate out of Palacio de San Carlos, which is the seat of the foreign ministry, right? So it'd be like if you had a president in the U.S. who, rather than running things out of the White House, kept the White House there, but operated out of Foggy Bottom, which is the part of Washington, D.C., where the State Department is, okay? And this is symbolic of a structural problem that has shaped Colombian politics since independence, and that is political, economic, and cultural power concentrated almost entirely in Bogota, leaving the coast, the Pacific coast, the Atlantic coast, the Caribbean coast, the plains out by Meta and out towards the Orinoco Basin, and the south down by where the Amazon, where Amazonas Department is, or along the border with Ecuador. We're talking about Nariño or Cauca. These regions have been chronically underrepresented. And Abelardo has said that he's going to introduce legislation to formally recognize Barranquilla as an alternate capital. That's going to be interesting, and that's going to be an interesting fight. Barranquilla is it's a powerful northern city. It's an industrial city, a port city, and you have it has its own regional political climate and dynasties, and not a whole lot in common, culturally speaking, with Bogota and the Altiplano, they call that area, Cundinamarca and Boyacá and over there. Or even really where Medellin is in the Eje Cafetero, which share a cultural affinity. So how that plays out and how hard he pushes on it, that's going to be really interesting to see. So he also wants Cali and Medellin to function as satellite seats of government. So he wants to decentralize all the operations that traditionally take place in Bogota. And whether that turns into real redistribution of investment and institutional capacity or stays symbolic, we're not going to know for at least a year or two what happens. But it matters most for the Pacific and Caribbean regions outside of Barranquilla and Medellin that voted for Cepeda. And so these other, like Chocó, went very much for Cepeda. Lots of the Caribbean coast outside of Barranquilla, so like over by Santa Marta and like the La Guajira Peninsula, and then down by the northern Urabá region of Antioquia. A lot of these rural neglected areas did go for Cepeda. And we'll be watching to see if they get remembered in de la Espriella's new government. On the international side, the United States moved very quickly. On Inauguration Day, the State Department released a statement titled A New Era in U.S.-Colombian Relations, and they announced that Washington, working with Congress, intends to mobilize $1 billion in security and economic assistance aimed at dismantling narco-trafficking networks, expanding trade, and modernizing Colombian infrastructure. That is a steep increase. U.S. security aid to Colombia had fallen from a historic $400 million to $500 million a year, down to roughly $187 million under Petro, amid disputes over drug policy and U.S. decertification warnings. U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche led the U.S. delegation to the inauguration. Trump, Vance, and Rubio all stayed home. And you could say that that was a political statement, or it could just be because of the security concerns of moving this kind of thing down there to Cali. And I mean, you saw there's like bus bombs with 1,000 pounds of explosive trying to get in there. And fortunately, the public security forces were able to keep any kinds of events happening that would affect the people who attended the inauguration. So they were all safe. But the head of the DEA was in attendance, I believe. And Washington has folded Colombia into a new regional anti-cartel coalition it's calling the Shield of the Americas. And De La Espriella has designated Medellín as that initiative's operational hub. Now, you also have, in Medellín, you have the mayor, Federico Gutierrez, who is has a reputation as kind of a anti-crime crusader. And he has been very enthusiastic and willing to work with U.S. authorities to capture narco traffickers, sex perverts, and money launderers and whatever kind of people. So it sort of makes sense, and I'm sure that Fico, the mayor right now of Medellín, as well as Andres Rendon, who is the governor of Antioquia, are enthusiastic about that. And that is a very sharp reversal from the relationship that deteriorated very badly under Gustavo Petro. And it lines up with what De La Espriella has said in his own victory speech in Barranquilla, the night when he was declared the winner of the election, that Colombia is returning to its place among the free nations as a serious partner and a loyal ally rather than a dependent one. Now, whether that partnership stays reciprocal or tilts into dependency on whichever administration happens to be in the White House is worth watching over the next 4 years, because remember, Trump only has 2 more years. And so that bilateral relationship is something that is always worth watching. But now, as always, De La Espriella has announced last month that he's closing the office of the Peace Commissioner, along with the presidential offices for national reconciliation and for human rights and international humanitarian law, folding their functions into the Interior, Foreign, and Defense ministries. So he says, no more sham peace processes during my administration. That his words, not mine. But so he's coming in and he's like, I'm going to be a hardliner. He says he's like Nayib Bukele, and he's like, I'm not going to negotiate with these rebels. I'm going to wipe them out. He also has said that he wants to eliminate the JEP, the HEP, the Transitional Justice Tribunal. It stands for Justicia Especial de Paz. It's basically a tribunal, but it is a special like peace and reconciliation and restorative justice, kind of molded in part on what they did in South Africa. It's a Transitional Justice Tribunal, but that's put into place by law, so he can't just by decree get rid of it. He might do it Trump style and try to get rid of things and try to go around Congress, but that is baked into the Constitution. And also Colombia has treaty obligations. So Colombia has gone into agreements with and these are ratified treaties so that they have the force of law, where they've gotten help from like the EU and US and maybe multilateral organizations to help implement the 2016 peace accords that Juan Manuel Santos negotiated. But Gustavo Petro's total peace failed by the numbers already laid out. However, dismantling a country's human rights architecture is a heavier decision than winding down just one failed negotiation strategy. And what replaces that institutional function matters, because you can say that, okay, I want to get rid of this organ, like you said, but the functions is not that I don't want to have peace, but the people who did this negotiation and that negotiation, this function is going to be given to the foreign ministry, for example, or this negotiation or this kind of restorative justice thing is going to be given to the justice ministry, and that's kind of what he seems to be wanting to do. When it comes to press freedom, the concerning pattern is well documented, and it predates the campaign. Between 2008 and 2019, De La Espriella filed 109 defamation and slander lawsuits against journalists. We call these in the U.S. SLAP lawsuits, and that's an acronym. SLAP, of course, is like I'm going to slap you in the face, but it also is a bofetada in Spanish, right? But it also is a acronym for basically if you are rich or powerful and maybe there's an investigative journalist and he's coming after you or doing something you don't like, then you sue him, not because you expect even to win the lawsuit, but you want to ruin his life by getting him to have to defend himself and hire lawyers that he probably can't afford or she probably can't afford. And De La Espriella has created a reputation for himself over the years of doing this. Ahead of the runoff back in May and June, FLIP, the Fundación por Libertad y Independencia en Prensa, the press freedom, the Foundation for Press Freedom, basically in Colombia, which is their leading kind of free press organization, and the International Federation for Human Rights issued a joint statement describing a pattern of attacks against the press, public disparagement, judicial harassment, and baseless challenges to editorial independence. De La Espriella's own response was that it's necessary to set limits on journalists who believe they are untouchable. This remains a concern now that he has the machinery of the state behind his thin skin, instead of just being able to make legal maneuvers as an attorney and private citizen. So I do have a concern. Will he continue his habit of harassing the media, or has he matured in this respect? Time will tell. The security plan itself also carries the same risk in a different way. De La Espriella has proposed building 10 maximum security mega prisons modeled directly on Nayib Bukele's CECAT in El Salvador, which is like a mega prison. And not only is it big, but it's like inside is super strict. You're not sitting around playing dominoes or, just outside working around in the yard or whatever. But it's this kind of prison that Bukele built to isolate not just top criminal leaders, but even the people down on the foot soldiers, if you will, the little neighborhood gangsters, and cutting off their ability to keep running organizations from behind bars. So one of the reasons why Colombian governments and politicians are so enthusiastic about extraditing people since back in the 80s and 90s is because a lot of times these prisoners, when they're in jail in Colombia, they can keep running their criminal enterprise. Sometimes they make these busts and they go in and inspect the prison and they find like whole call centers where people are using cellular phones to extort people or to run WhatsApp scams and these kinds of things. And Bukele said, we're not going to do that. And you're not talking, you're not having idle chit chat, but you're being punished. They don't even pretend like it's any kind of rehabilitation. You're being punished. And the idea is to keep you isolated from the public such that you cannot continue to run any kind of criminal ventures from behind bars. And a senior official from El Salvador, from Bukele's government, has already stated that he's willing to advise Colombia on building these. Medellín itself is building a 1,300 inmate high security facility that Federico Gutierrez announced. And he says he expects it to open next year. So it's already well underway. So that is not a Abelardo initiative, but this is something that the local administration, Medellín and Antioquia, have gone ahead with. Bukele's version in El Salvador produced a dramatic drop in gang violence, but it also produced mass detention with minimal due process, sweeping up poor young men on thin evidence of any kind of gang affiliation. A lot of times there are a lot of complaints and mothers and whoever saying, they've got my son in there. He's not a gangster. Like basically, if you have a tattoo, what they say is in El Salvador, if you have a tattoo, then they just assume that you must be in a gang. So maybe you're just one of these like hippies who, or not even a hippie, they've gone mainstream, right? But you just like tattoos, and it's not a good idea in El Salvador to go and get tatted up just because you think it's cool, because you might get thrown in jail before anybody, even a defense attorney, or you're not going in there and they're presenting all this evidence or anything like that. It's not like, well, show me where the evidence is that you're just locked up and nobody sees you and nobody can reach you. Okay. That's not how justice is supposed to work. So whether Colombia's national version repeats that part of the model, we don't know yet, because the program is still being built. This guy, we're in his first week in office, de las Espriellas. And it's one of the most important things to watch over the next year for anyone who cares about this country, and human rights and real justice, as well as along with crime and security. De la Espriella's own victory speech struck a different note than his record suggests. He says he was very conciliatory. No victors and no vanquished. No retaliation. No persecution. Your rights will be respected even if you do not vote for me. And with less than 50% of the runoff vote and no party of his own in Congress, that conciliatory approach is probably not generosity but prudent strategy. Now you say, well, 50%, how do you have less than 50% of the runoff vote if you only had two candidates? How did he win doing that? Because in Colombia, you have what they call votar en blanco. And you can go and show up to vote and then protest by saying, yes, I'm here and I want to participate civically, but I'm just disgusted with either candidate. And so I'm going to vote, but I'm going to vote none of the above, is basically what you're saying. So because of that, you can still win with a thin margin, and you have less than 50%, but still more than the other guy. And this is also the only version of this presidency that has a chance of lasting past a single term. And what I mean by that is you can't get reelected as a president, but if he's trying to build this project, right? So Gustavo Petro tried to build his Pacto Histórico and his Total Peace Project. And by Cepeda losing, that puts an end to Petro's project, at least in the short term. Okay, Total Peace's failure fell hardest on low-income Colombians in the cities and the countryside, the people without private security or armored Toyotas who cannot simply avoid a dangerous neighborhood because, oh, I'm rich, I can move. No, I can only afford to live in this place and it's run over by gangs or guerrillas or whatever. So how do you make life better for them? If the crackdown that just began under the Urban Security Blocs decree targets the armed groups themselves rather than the poor people living near them, then Colombia's security numbers reverse the trend documented above. If it doesn't, the country trades one set of victims for another. The armed groups tested every recent transition in Colombia early, and there's no reason to expect this one to be any different. Expect the FARC dissident structures and the ELN to probe the new administration's response in the coming weeks. Let me know what you think in the comments on YouTube or on our social media channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And another thing, and this, same as always, beyond the usual like and subscribe or 5-star rating on the podcast, which does help and tells the platforms you want more of this, don't trust these algorithms. Some ornery politician, or doesn't matter who, can get pissed off and pull strings to get a channel deplatformed. Maybe when I say something critical about Abelardo, he'll, call up, I don't know who, YouTube or Google or whoever. But you've seen this kind of thing happen. And so subscribe to our newsletter. That way, no matter what happens with these platforms or these algorithms, we can stay connected. We will never share your email. We've been in business for over a decade and we never have. So for Finance Colombia, go to fcsubscribe.com. And that's just like F like finance, C like Colombia, subscribe.com. And you'll see a form there to sign up. And one last thing. Remember, next to kindness, curiosity is the greatest virtue. So remain skeptical, stay smart, and by all means, think for yourself. See you soon.